Welcome, everyone, to Appen Media's Georgia Politics Podcast. I am Lindsay Coates, and today I am joined by State House Rep Michelle O for District 50, which is primarily Johns Creek, a little bit of Alpharetta in there. And we also have Heather Hallett, founder of Georgia Majority for Gun Safety. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so today we are going to discuss the legislative session as it relates to the gun safety bills that were proposed, when the session started, where they ended up, public opinion on these things. So I want to jump in and start with some sobering facts, quite frankly. Georgia ranks 44th in the nation for gun safety measures, according to Everytown. The leading cause of child-related deaths in Georgia is gun violence, and nearly 300 kids between newborn to 19 were killed in 2024, as referenced on the Georgia Department of Health site. And just a few other quick facts related that were on your site, Heather. 90% of Americans support universal background checks. 82% of gun owners support safe storage. 76% support extreme risk protection orders, and 72% support raising the minimum age of purchase to 21. So that kind of sets the stage for where we are at in Georgia and where public opinion is. So we're here. This is the day before Sign Die, which is the last day of the fast-paced legislative session in Georgia. Little different than how they do it across the country. But I want to ask you both just a simple question to start out. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you grade what happened under the Gold Dome on safety issues this year?
Well, I think probably the first thing to say is that we're not done yet, right?
Okay.
So I'm not going to make an assessment yet of how we did until we get to that final minute of that final day, because as with every legislative session, there are still issues up in the air. There's still potential for some of our priorities to move. So I never want to put, the fork in it until we know what is passed and what is done for the year, and that we'll have to refile next year.
More than fair. More than fair. Heather?
I just want to thank you, Lindsay, for framing the discussion the way I often try to frame the discussion. What I say about the work of Georgia Majority is that there is this huge gulf between public opinion and public policy on gun safety measures, and we're just trying to close that gap. And I will echo. Dr. Al in saying that we don't really know we can't really give a grade or put a scale number on how we're doing this session, but there's really the potential to see a little bit of that closing of the gap between public opinion and public policy. And
Okay.
if that happens, there's really going to be some cause for celebration. It might not be like a 10 out of 10 cause for celebration, but we've been kind of at 0 out of 10 for a long time. So,
Any
um,
moving of the
we'll see.
needle. Yeah. Okay. So, Dr. Al, Michelle, walk me through the bills you brought forward this session. You had HB 1 on pediatric safe storage, HB 2, safe storage tax credit, also 3 on universal background checks, and 4 three on a 3-day waiting period. So, not only talk to us about those, but how do you get to have the first 4 bills of the session?
I'm glad you noticed that HB 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all gun safety bills from our office. And that was a deliberate choice, right? In terms of how we do it, all you have to do is show up the earliest person into the building that morning and stand outside the office before it opens and hope that no one in leadership scoops in and takes those good bill numbers. But really, the message we're trying to send with this is that gun safety is and has to be our top priority in this legislative session, and certainly for the Democrats and certainly for my office, right? It's something that, as Heather noted, has really lagged public opinion in terms of what people want to see out of the legislature. And this is my 6th year serving. Every single year, it seems like all we're doing is passing bills that loosen gun safety measures rather than strengthening them. And it's really increasingly not what voters want to see, right? So when we prioritize these bills, I think it does two things. One is obviously we want to pass these bills and make our community safer. But the second thing is that it shows voters that we are listening to them and that we are working our hardest, even within a system of constraints in a conservative state like Georgia, to really change the culture and the environment around gun safety to the point where we can pass some of these good bills.
Yeah. Heather, your org is nonpartisan and it takes that approach of protecting Second Amendment rights while trying to implement these policies to reduce gun deaths. You were talking to legislators from both parties, and what were the conversations that you were having about these bills while you were at the Capitol
Um,
that you can share?
yeah. So, it, and I do want to stress that, we are nonpartisan, and what the goal of Georgia Majority is um, to make gun safety a nonpartisan issue. And I mean, I think you just have to acknowledge that right now that's not really the case. I often describe the problem is that there is this very small minority of the voting population that is radical and immovable, and they only care about gun rights. And they're very active and very loud, and they exert, um, a disproportionate influence over public policy because they really are only operating within the bounds of one party, right? So, and
Mhm.
especially in Georgia, where we are so gerrymandered, and the primary races can be won and lost on these extreme by the influence of extremists, and that's really what we're talking about. The goal of Georgia Majority is like, okay, well, there's this very small minority, but the rest of the people who are maybe not, living and breathing on, what happens with like the silent expanding silencers or expanding stand your ground in Georgia. We should actually have more power and influence over what happens in with our policies on gun safety. And we just have to do a better job of organizing ourselves. So, you know, what the conversations at the Capitol with legislators, it is it's just night and day, right?
Mhm.
We have incredible champions like Representative Al on the House side, and on the Senate side, our biggest champion, unfortunately, is retiring, but Senator Elena Parent has sponsored, so many bills. And, on our website, we have, I think I've counted, it's over 30 gun safety bills,
Wow.
and not a one really gets a hearing. And actually, the gun safety bill that did get a hearing and is advanced the farthest this session is sponsored by a Republican, and I think that that's really meaningful because those conversations look different. And it is a matter of, if you start with the problem and you outline the problem, 300 children died from firearms in 2024. Nobody wants to see a child die. And that conversation with a legislator, if you can start with that shared goal,
Mhm.
then you start to say, okay, what can we do about it? And everybody can support responsible gun ownership, right? So
Right.
everybody, then it's just a matter of how you go about doing that. And so I would say often the conversations with Republican legislators are, okay, so how can we support improving the rates of responsible gun ownership in Georgia? Um, and it's just a different theory of government. So
Mhm.
those are, I often hear from Republican legislators, I can't do mandates. We don't do mandates, right? So,
Right.
okay, if you don't do mandates, how about a tax credit? How about funding for violence prevention? So, it's just starting with
Different
shared
framing.
goal, yeah, and different framing.
Different framing. Let's talk about that bill, HB 79,
Mhm.
right? It was introduced previously and came back this session. Representative Al, talk to me about this bill and what happened this go round to get it passed from out of the House.
Right. So HB 79 is a version of a bill that we've been working on for probably around 4 years at this point that comes at the issue of safe storage for guns from a slightly different angle, right? You mentioned HB 1, which is the Pediatric Health Safe Storage Act. That's a bill that requires that any gun that can be accessed by a minor be stored securely. Seems pretty basic, and it is actually fairly basic. The way that HB 79 and other bills like it come at it is that it does not mandate anything. As we noted, it does not require anything. It does not punish anything. It does not criminalize anything. All it does is it offers an up to $300 tax credit for purchase of safe storage equipment. So the goal is that it incentivizes what I think we can all understand to be responsible gun owning behavior.
Mhm.
I think that for that reason, because it comes from this different angle, and let's be real, everyone likes to give out a tax credit during an election year, that this bill has had the most success in recent memory. It's
Mm.
passed nearly unanimously twice out of the House, both last year and the year before. And as often happens, it got hung up in the Senate, which is somewhat more conservative than the House. And there's only so much we can control, but I do think, just going back to this issue of the culture around this issue changing, is that I do think that Republicans, even more conservative Republicans, and in particular Republicans representing swing districts or moderate districts, are recognizing that, first of all, their intransigence on the issue does not play well, because what it ultimately means is like they are not listening to their voters by
Yep.
refusing to entertain any of these policies, right? And the second thing is that they recognize this is probably going to become a better electoral issue for them if they just give a little bit on even the most benign gun safety bills. So I think where we are on this is that the Republicans have expressed some interest in moving um, what has the language of the original HB 79, the safe storage tax credit, out of the Senate and hopefully getting it back to us in the House before midnight on sine die, because we still have to approve of the changes that they made. So there are several steps left in this puzzle. It gives me a lot of anxiety, frankly, that we are up to the final day of session. And what we're counting on is that the Senate picks it up, votes it out, hopefully while the sun is still up, sends it back to us. That bill gets in line in the huge queue of all the other bills that we have to vote on to check off on, agree and disagree before midnight. But it is doable. Anything is doable as long as it's a priority for not just us, but for the majority party. So to some
Right.
degree, it is up to them. And I think they should want this to happen.
Yeah. So you'd consider it a win if it does get through uh, because it is promoting more safe storage. Like you would
Absolutely.
consider that a win.
That is
Okay.
absolutely a win. It would
Okay.
probably be the first substantive gun safety measure that just passed in maybe even a couple decades. And I will note that this bill, this type of policy, the reason I picked it up originally back in 2023, I first drafted a version of this bill in May of 2023, was the first go around, and I started shopping it around to Republicans. This bill passed out of Virginia just that year with overwhelming bipartisan support, signed into law by the very conservative Governor Glenn Youngkin in Virginia. And it was the only gun bill that I can ever remember seeing that was supported, endorsed by both the NRA and by Everytown. I dare you to find one other bill that
Interesting.
has that type of support on both sides of the spectrum, because I think you're right. A, we obviously understand why that's a good gun safety issue to encourage
Hmm.
more people or facilitate the ability for people to buy safe storage. But, frankly, gun sellers and suppliers can sell products too, right? And
Right.
nothing takes away their ability to buy more guns. We just hope they store them securely.
Right. Right. Yeah. Because at the same time, we can get safe storage, but it's also putting more guns into the into the populace and circulation. Here's what I'm looking at from this session. There was stand your ground got strengthened. Cities got banned. No, it didn't. Oh, wait. Okay. It didn't pass
That's
through.
yeah,
Okay.
that there were bills passed, but I mean, or bills introduced, uh,
Okay.
or that have still not crossed the final.
Crossed over to make it. Okay. So
Well,
potentially.
that bill has crossed over, but it has not yet been selected for a floor vote in the House.
Okay. Okay. Um, cities potentially being banned from passing local gun storage laws. The silencer beer bill that was it ultimately failed. Safe storage tax credit got kind of stripped down some too. Heather, we'll start with you, but why does Georgia seem to be going backwards on gun safety when the population is so strongly in favor? And I guess you giving some examples of, or one example of how we are kind of moving forward, hopefully. But I don't know. Talk to me about the differential between what policy is happening and public opinion.
I'm going to strike a much more optimistic note.
Please.
Every year, there are, I think that, you know, bills like the Second Amendment Preservation Act, there are all kinds of bills are introduced, and it just depends upon really the legislative body, and in Georgia, the majority party has control over that legislative body to a great degree. What makes the final, you know, what gets passed. And
Mhm.
then there's also the governor has to sign those bills into law. So, on all of the bills that you mentioned, actually, um, we are, there's, I don't know, some ray of hope that actually none of these policies are in 2026 going to be enacted, and so we may be able to hold the line on the expansion of gun rights in Georgia. And as you noted at the opening of our interview, we already have, we already are very, very generous in our gun rights. So, you know, there's little policy reason to expand stand your ground, or to deregulate silencers, right? And I think that the legislature is starting to recognize that that is where the public is, and maybe that's the reason why, if and as Representative Al rightly says, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. It's a very eventful 24 hours.
Yeah.
It's 36 hours that we have ahead of us. So, we don't know what's going to happen, but the governor has not signed the bill that would punish the city of Savannah and other cities for passing local ordinances. And we don't know if he's going to sign that. He's had plenty of time. We'll see.
Let's talk about that one. And Representative Val, feel free to jump in too. But that one in particular, it was Savannah had an ordinance fining gun owners who leave firearms in unlocked cars. Okay, that makes okay. But this bill at the state level would let gun owners sue the city for up to $25,000 in damages if they do get fined. Um, so we're just waiting at this point to see if Kemp signs it. Is that
Or
essentially
vetoes it. He has the option to veto it.
okay?
And I think there's certainly room for him to veto it just on the grounds of it superseding local control, which is a pretty core Republican tenet that, we should not overreach from the state level
Right.
to, overrule the local governmental bodies that know their communities the best. We hear that all the time, right?
But it's a Republican-backed bill, right?
It was from a pretty far right member of the
Okay.
Georgia Senate who has since left to run for Congress. I don't think he was particularly popular. I don't think his imprint has a whole lot of juice with his own chamber, certainly not across the hall. So there's really no obligation for this to be signed into law. And Governor Kemp, if he chooses to, has plenty of cover to veto it for reasons that have nothing to do with guns, but simply on the basis of it being an overreach
Here,
of state government.
that local control. Great, thank you. When the silencer bill was on the floor, you made you made the point, and I believe this is a direct quote. I cannot believe how stupid it is that I need to make these points. And that was during the silencer issue debate. What what is it like to be standing there arguing against legal silencers? Like what are you just like, what are we doing? I don't, what goes through your head? I don't,
Well, that was a very interesting bill, and I think it illustrates some of the things that we're talking about. Because Republicans very rarely, the majority party, very rarely brings a bill to the floor that they don't know they can pass, right? Because
right,
why waste your time and why risk the humiliation of having a public vote where your side fails, right? So
right.
that's unusual. I do think that indicates that they thought they could win this vote, even if it was going to be narrow. But the fact is that they lost.
Mhm.
That bill did not pass out of the House. And I think that part of why that bill did not pass out of the House is first, it's really difficult to make a logic-based argument as to why you should loosen restrictions on silencers. Some of the arguments that were made were frankly pretty ludicrous that they're like, oh, it protects hearing, which it doesn't because it's still pretty loud. It's still above the decibel level at which hearing damage happens. So, first of all, that. Second
Yeah.
thing is, I think it's quite difficult to argue that it does not decrease public safety when you decrease the volume of gunshots, because gunshots are a signal to people that something dangerous is happening, that they
Mhm.
should run away, they should call the police. It gives signal to first responders where to go to respond to possible injuries and fatalities. All these things are obvious. And even if it's not totally silent, as they kept telling us, quieter noises are harder to hear than louder noises, right? Like it's this level of having to explain that is absolutely galling. I'm like, why should I even have to say this? It's insulting to us as a body to have to
Really?
say these things, right?
Yep.
But I think in framing the discussion that way, it basically gives a message, first of all, that this looks so stupid that we're talking about this. It
Mhm.
makes you look stupid that you brought it up. It makes us look stupid that we have to defend it. Like, let's just all acknowledge the basic facts of this, right?
Mhm.
The second thing is that it highlights the ways in which the culture around this issue is changing yet again, right? The reason that bill failed isn't just because all the Democrats voted against it, which we did, obviously, but because lots of Republicans actually removed themselves from the vote. They didn't feel brave enough to vote no, because that's like a conspicuous provocation, I guess. But many of them found a reason to not be in the room, right? So it's really not so much how many people vote no against a bill, it's how many yes votes you can get. They needed 91 yes votes to get this across the finish line. And they only had, I think, 87. So
Yeah, failed by four.
we're
Failed by four.
kind of, I guess, in the bathroom. They had to take a call or they were getting a snack, right? So, and many of them were, in fact, the sort of Republicans from these more moderate districts. Maybe some of these Republicans had a law enforcement background, and they were like, I cannot have my name on this vote. Like, this is indeed too ridiculous, even for me to go with my party
Mhm.
on this. And that's part of the work we do also, is just make it so uncomfortable for people to
To
keep looking
happen.
away from this issue that they just at some point have to say yes, right? And that you have to make room for people to do something that's hard, which is to go against their own party. And that's what we're trying to do.
Excellent. Heather, while the legislature was meeting this session, a jury convicted Colin Gray of second-degree murder for giving his son access to the AR-15 that was used at the Appalachia High School shooting in 2024. He bought him that rifle for Christmas. He let him keep it in his bedroom. He ignored months, maybe years of warnings from mental health professionals for years. What does it mean that a Georgia jury held a parent criminally accountable and we can't get safe storage passed? But also, talk to me about how you might potentially use that in the future as support for the work that you're doing.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I will tell you I remember having a conversation with a Republican legislator before Appalachia happened, And he said, well, isn't it still like, aren't you required, to make sure that your kids don't, access your firearms? Because, I know courts will hold people liable. And I said, well, that's after the fact, right? Like there has to be damage done for a child who's accessed a gun that was not securely stored to then actually hurt somebody. But let's say, that they had the gun and they hit the wall instead of a person, no harm, no foul, right? Like, and that was how I was trying to describe it to the legislator, and he was like, "Hmm, interesting," like, and so I guess to me the 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 finding in the Appalachia shooting, I was not surprised because to me it's like this is just
100%.
evidence that of a shared value, right? We know that we don't want children to be able to access firearms and hurt themselves or other people. And again, I always talk about this disconnect between public opinion and public policy, and I think that the verdict was just evidence of that disconnect, right? Like we
Yeah.
know that's a bad thing. We know that that troubled teen should not have had unfettered access to firearms, and
Yeah.
that was a failure. That is not what we expect of caregivers, right?
Right.
And that's just setting a standard. And that's pretty much what the what HB1 is all about, right? It's just
Right.
saying like, just like car seats, like, we used to have the kids rolling around in the back of the cars, and then we were like, nope, as a caregiver, you actually have to secure your child in the car when you're driving around. And that's really what HB1 is. It is that manifestation because no, it's not like the police are coming into your home and checking, are your guns all secured? It's more about this is the standard of care and writing that into law. So to me, I was not surprised by the verdict. I think other people were a little bit, oh wow, it's the South. I can't believe that happened. I kind of knew because we
I work in
represent the
this. Yeah.
majority of Georgians, and I know that that's something that the majority supports. That we think that that's the standard of care. I just feel like it's further, it's making that it's jumping to the next level, right? Of
Right.
actually passing that law.
Is there a way, because you touched on it, right? Like you were already telling the lawmaker this is like something wrong. It has to go wrong before it can go right. And then we have this case and the system showed that it works and that something does have to go wrong before
Yeah, right.
before it can work and find the person guilty. The cognitive dissonance for me is like the hardest, I guess. And I'm trying not to be coming from a level of frustration or a negative background and want to be hopeful, but yeah, it just seems to be very frustrating.
Well, I'll tell you that from conversations I've had with my Republican colleagues is that often
Yeah,
this case and the fact that the father was held for furnishing this firearm to his 14-year-old son, they use that as a reason that we don't need to pass any further gun safety
yeah,
measures, right? Because they're like, why do we need more laws? See, this one's working just fine. See, it's working. The law's working. And of course, we explain about,
they had to die. People,
right. It's like we would prefer to have something prevent 4 people getting killed
yeah,
rather than prosecuting someone after. Like my goal is not to prosecute anyone, right?
right,
That is not the goal. And, there's a reason, just going back to HB1, which is sort of the progenitor bill for a lot of what we're talking about. There's a reason that we called it the Pediatric Health Safe Storage Act, right? First, because it refers back to a 2020 CDC study that came out that showed that gun violence was the top cause of death in kids and teenagers. So we wanted to center it in terms of statistics and concrete goals that we had. But the second thing is that we wanted people to start thinking about this issue as a public health bill
Mhm.
because that to some degree takes it out of the political space. And more importantly, it emphasizes prevention. The
Mhm.
lever arm of public health is prevention of harm, right? So certainly, I don't think anyone would disagree that it's wrong or unnecessary that we punish the father in this case for criminally negligently providing this gun to a minor and not supervising it. But to not leave on the table the fact that this could have been prevented in a real meaningful way, particularly because in this case, the police actually came to that teenager's house a full year before the Appalachia shooting because of worrisome behavior they had. Police were actually at the house talking to the father and asking him about guns because of the nature of some of this child's interactions with his peers. If we had passed the Pediatric Health Safe Storage Act that first year that we had run it, police would have had the opportunity to tell this father in the course of this conversation, look, did you know there's a new law here in Georgia that just passed that requires that guns be stored securely away from minors? Are your guns stored securely? And the father would have said yes or no. And then the police could have said, can you show me?
Mhm.
This is a missed opportunity, right? Like there are a few cases where there's such a clear line between a place that we could have intervened and abdicated that responsibility to a crime that happens because of that lack of intervention.
Mhm.
Um, you know, we hate that the only time we get to seriously talk about these issues is in the wake of a serious tragedy.
Yeah.
But honestly, it's the only way we can sometimes get people to listen to us.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a sad, sad
And and I'll
point.
just add in,
Please.
that's the this is a case study where it would have been helpful. And what the data says is that when states, because 26 states and the District of Columbia have passed secure storage laws, when those laws are in place, we see up to a 30 to 40% drop in childhood firearm injury and death.
Wow.
So the statistics illustrate, the case is one, example, and then the data and the statistics just support. And what I like to say is those are statistics and numbers, but each child is
Yeah.
life that, just think about your own children. I can't even imagine.
Right. Yeah. I'm getting like chills and stoked up a little bit thinking about it too, and my own children. So let's let me say this. Heather, you've said, and I think that this is important, and it is the point of your organization, that this is not about taking guns away from people. This is Georgia. We are a state of gun owners. It is what it is, and I own one as well. Um, most gun owners, we started out by saying they support common sense storage. Um, how do you go about the next session? How do you move forward knowing what's happened this session, like and stay optimistic about next year? What do you do in the meantime, I guess?
So I'm going to say two things. The first is that I wanted to point out that HB 79, which was the original tax credit on secure storage devices, it did go over to the Senate, which
Mhm.
Representative Al pointed out is a little more conservative. And on the Senate side, they added on this 4-day tax holiday for all gun purchases, right? And I think you mentioned that it got
Yes.
weakened. So that passed the Senate and came back over to the House because there was a change, and it was slated for a House vote last week. And that vote didn't happen. And it's very hard to convey to somebody who hasn't been, down at the Capitol talking with legislators, kind of knowing what happens in Georgia. Um, the reason why that vote didn't happen, we don't know because those decisions are made in rooms
Mhm.
that I'm not a part of. Um, but I think that it's safe to assume that they thought that if they voted on that bill and approved that bill, that again, it just looks kind of stupid. Like when you
Mhm.
talk to people who aren't a part of the legislature and you say, "Oh yeah, they want to deregulate silencers and pass a 4-day tax holiday on all gun purchases," people are just dumbstruck, confused. Like that makes people lose faith in government because they're
Mhm.
like, who wants that? Like who, so I just want to say that that is something that gives me hope, right? So that is something that happened at the legislature, and that's the majority party. That's the ruling party saying, ooh, wait a minute. We gotta, hold our horses and change course a little bit. So that gives me hope. And then what we are really working to do, we have a gun safety candidate pledge. It's hard in Georgia because there really hasn't been a lot of like action on gun safety bills. So it's not like we have this long history of like what people have done. So we just send this to every candidate after the primaries. We will send this to every candidate for every state house and Senate seat and our statewide candidates and say, do you support these foundational gun safety policies, red flag laws, universal background checks, secure storage, and funding for violence prevention? And we hope to just really promote the idea that Georgia voters can and should look at gun safety when they go to the ballot box. So it should be a part of what they and that's been a little bit of the disconnect, right? When we public policy, public opinion are so far
Right.
apart, it's partially because our voting population is not fully taking into account, oh, we should be voting on gun safety. This should be something that we really think about when we go into the polls. So those are two things that give me hope.
Have you sent those before, and do you find that some people will sign them and then not champion? No, they're
No,
putting their
not
name
yet.
on it. Yeah, okay.
No, I think that that's a pledge that
They probably just won't sign it.
that yeah, I think that you will find there are Republicans who will sign it, but
There are.
generally
Okay,
those are Republicans
that's
who
good.
are running in districts um, where if they didn't sign it, they really have no hope of,
Right,
of gaining
right.
it purchase.
Michelle, is this a big issue in your district? Do you find when talking with people that this is something that they're happy you're championing? Would they prefer? I mean, talk to me about that and what the voters in your district are telling you about this.
Yeah, so as you noted, my district is in the suburbs northeast of Atlanta. I'm in
Mm,
Johns Creek with a little bit of Alpharetta, but probably more importantly than that for this conversation, I am completely encircled by Republican districts that are also moderate, right? They just
mhm,
happen to have a Republican. I'm a Democrat, I'm in a moderate district. So yes, it is really important for my district. Voters talk to me about it all the time. I'm sure some of it is because I do a lot of gun safety work, so people will naturally approach me to talk about it, but it is also organically an important issue for folks out here. Therefore, I know it must be an important issue for all those swing Republicans that are frankly
mhm,
endangered, especially in this electoral cycle where things are maybe not going to go quite their way in terms of them keeping their seats. So I do think it shows that every legislator, regardless of the election cycle, regardless of where they are, really needs to do a good job of listening to their voters and
mhm.
representing what their voters want, because that is literally their job at the Capitol, right?
Right.
So the more that people feel that their legislators are not being responsive to their concerns, the less likely they are going to be to vote for them or to reelect them, right? That goes for me, that goes for everyone. One thing I will also note about this area that is sort of very specific to Georgia and regionally, these suburbs, is that I have a very, very high immigrant community in this area. Johns Creek in particular is something like 35% Asian immigrants in particular, and immigrants from all over the country, so all over the world, of course. And the interesting thing about talking to these voters is that you really recognize the ways that American culture around gun ownership is extremely aberrant, right? Because when
Mhm.
someone grows up in another country and immigrates to America and is a naturalized citizen and votes and everything like that, regardless of if they're conservative or more liberal, most of them are like, the way you guys are about guns is bananas, right? Like
Wild.
it's very foreign to them, literally.
Yeah.
The availability of guns, frankly, the fetishization of guns,
Hmm.
how much we talk about it, how much we obsess about it, that is odd to people.
Yeah.
So I think that's good perspective. We should remember that a lot of these people vote, right? Immigrants can vote.
Hmm.
Many people in our communities can vote, right? So in changing the culture around this issue, part of it is communicating to Republicans that can be convinced on this issue, can be swayed, that if they don't start evolving in their thinking on this issue and moving away from this like partisan entrenchment on gun safety, they're probably not going to be able to be around here much longer. So, how well do they want to do their jobs and how much longer do they want to do it?
That's right. That's right. Because the people are paying way more attention now than they ever have been before. Last question, we'll wrap this up. But if for anyone watching that wants to do something about this, I know for this legislative session, it may be coming to an end tomorrow. It is coming to an end. But what's one action that they can either do today? Um, well, this will come out afterwards, so I guess scrap that. But what's an action that somebody can take that would actually matter on this issue between now and next session?
Well, I have one. For many years now, we've been running this safe storage bill, but we've put together what we call a legislative toolkit for people to work on to help communicate exactly this message to all the lawmakers across Georgia, that this is an issue important to their voters, regardless of party. They need to start listening to their voters better because the majority of Georgians care about this, right? This is work we can do even when we're not in session, because frankly, one session ends, another one begins. Nothing good or hard happens in just 1 year or even in just 6 years, right? So we're going to come back. We're not done yet. We're not going anywhere. And we're going to keep pushing this issue until the culture changes enough that we can pass it, right? So
Mhm.
I'm going to send your viewers and your listeners the link to this toolkit because it gives a list of a lot of concrete tasks ranging from the most low touch to the most high touch that they can do to help promote
Perfect.
this policy, this issue, and to make sure that when we come back next year, that it's going to get heard and it's going to start moving.
Wonderful. And Heather, how can they find you?
I will give you two. This is pretty much what we do is organizing and trying to get Georgia citizens to advocate on this issue. So first, just go to our website, georgiamajority.org. Immediately, a pop-up will come up, and you can sign up for our newsletter. And we, every single time we send a newsletter, we have an action alert. So it's always reaching out to, a legislator, or in this case, on to my second thing, and I really urge everybody who is listening, after the primaries are over, and still, even if you know who's running in primaries, you want to reach out to any candidate who is running to represent you in the 2026 election cycle, please send them an email and say, I'm a Georgia voter and I care about gun safety and want to reduce firearm injury and death in Georgia. Will you support this pledge, this gun safety candidate pledge in 2026? Send them the link. It's on our website. And that is a way for Georgia citizens to convince people running to represent them that gun safety is an important issue to Georgia voters.
Excellent. Excellent. Ladies, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. It is genuinely appreciated by more than I think that you realize. So thank you for joining me today and taking some time out. I will let you get back to it. And thanks for everyone that is listening or watching this. And this has been another edition of Appen Media's Georgia Politics Podcast. Thanks so much.